think the legislation is a reality, undoubtedly. I think it's fair to say that in the past there have been curators and trustees and directors at the British Museum who have hidden behind the legislation. It has been a convenient excuse for inactivity, but that is not the way everybody at the British Museum feels at the moment. There are people at the British Museum who feel very uncomfortable about the status quo, but they would need the law to change if objects like the Benin bronzes were to be permanently returned to a country like Nigeria, and short of a new configuration in the British Parliament, which obviously means an election, it's difficult to see that legislation passing at the moment.
And yet all of these other institutions are making these significant steps. So how isolated, how much pressure does that bring to bear on the British Museum?
Well, it undoubtedly increases the sense of isolation and increases the pressure, but remember that an institution like the British Museum is also under pressure from other areas. There's a British government with its own interest. There are other significant national museums in this country, like the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Royal Collection, all of which might be, I guess you would say, more conservatively inclined, and they too can exert their pressure and influence on the British Museum. So the trustees, the director, the board are being pulled in different directions.
One of the things that was clear from this evening's events is that physically 6 objects are going back, more will follow, but a lot will stay, even if the legal ownership is transferred. Could that be a sort of more broad settlement once any legal hurdles are cleared for this entire situation?
Well, I've always felt that with a bit of common sense and diplomacy, there are clear win-wins around the Benin bronzes. After all, there are thousands of these wonderful objects, and if you listen to what the Oba, the King of Benin, is saying, what his father and grandfather have been saying before, they are in no doubt that these objects have been wonderful ambassadors of their culture, and I think they would like to see a world in which there were Benin bronzes in London, in New York, in Paris, in Johannesburg, in Beijing. Why not? Spread around the world so that people can admire this culture, but at the same time they want more of them to go back, and they want what they perceive as a terrible historical injustice to be acknowledged.
And in terms of lootings, this was a particularly egregious example.
It was a particularly egregious example, and that, I suppose, is one of the reasons why there's such momentum around the Benin bronzes. It's much easier to define right or wrong in a case like this. Not unique, in fact. I mean, just on the African continent, the British military looted a place called Makadala in Abyssinia. They looted Ashanti gold from what is today Ghana. The French looted from Abomey in the Benin Republic. So you do have these, I suppose, more shocking, more egregious cases, and what you're seeing is a consensus is emerging around them, because in a way it's easier, and they aren't necessarily indicative of the majority of objects which came to a country like Britain during the colonial period. In fact, what is more common is a more opaque set of circumstances. Say, missionary Winston Smith was given such an object as a gift. District Commissioner Worthington Smythe paid £5 for it given to a friendly chief. Now, how do you analyse the power dynamics of those kinds of relationships? That's much more complicated, and I don't think museums want to go there, frankly.
And outside of this particular set of dominoes, which they potentially are, there are other stories, other objects, clearly the Parthenon marbles. How much are we seeing this kind of shifting those sorts of issues as well, outside of this particular African context?
I think that there is a general shift. You can see, for example, objects which have been returned to Australia, New Zealand, taken from indigenous cultures. You can see increasingly vocal demands from parts of Asia. I think that is the trend. That is the way in which the world is going. The Benin bronzes have become peculiarly emblematic in a way I think that many of us couldn't have imagined 3 or 4 years ago. The pace of the momentum, and that goes back to the circumstances in which they were taken, and the fact also that they are so splendid. They are amongst Africa's greatest cultural treasures, and so whether you're in Seattle on the west coast of America or Stockholm and pretty much anywhere in between in the Western world, there will be Benin bronzes in your municipal museum, and that, I think, has given them a peculiar resonance.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Barnaby.
Barnaby Phillips is my name. Yeah.